Rhode Irish, Baghdad, 2007. Specialist Nicole Anderson's convoy of 23 vehicles entered the kill zone at 14:37 hours. What happened in the next 6 minutes would require 1,100 rounds from her M2 Browning, violate every principle of machine gun employment, and save 92 American lives. The barrel was glowing white-hot. The weapon was seconds from catastrophic failure, but Nicole Anderson kept firing. Rhode Irish was the most dangerous road in the world in 2007. The 12-kilometer stretch from Baghdad International Airport to the Green Zone had claimed more American lives than any other piece of ground in Iraq. Every convoy that traveled Rhode Irish knew the statistics. 1 in 3 would be hit by IEDs. 1 in 5 would face complex ambush. On May 23, 2007, Convoy Eagle 7 would face both. Which city in the world are you watching this video from today? Please subscribe and support us for more stories. Specialist Nicole Anderson was 22 years old, 5'4", 30 pounds. She had joined the Army straight out of high school in small-town Nebraska, where she learned to shoot on her grandfather's farm. She qualified expert on every weapon system, but the M2 Browning 50 caliber machine gun was her specialty. She understood the weapon with an intimacy that went beyond training. She knew its rhythm, its temperature, its breaking points. She was about to push it beyond all of them. The convoy consisted of 23 vehicles, 5 M1114 up-armored Humvees, 15 AMRAP vehicles carrying supplies, and 3 fuel tankers. Nicole was the gunner in the lead Humvee, call sign Eagle 71. Her truck commander was Staff Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez, a veteran of 3 deployments who had survived 12 IED strikes. Rodriguez would later say that Nicole had the best eyes and fastest reflexes of any gunner he'd ever commanded. The intelligence briefing that morning had warned of increased insurgent activity along Rhode Irish. Unmanned aerial vehicle footage had shown suspicious movement in the industrial district, possible IED emplacement near the overpass, and unusual patterns of civilian absence, all indicators of a planned attack. The convoy commander, First Lieutenant James Mitchell, had requested Apache escort, but all air assets were committed to operations in Sadr City. They would make the run with what they had. Nicole had spent the morning preparing her weapon with obsessive detail. She had 1,200 rounds of .50 caliber ammunition loaded in ammunition cans, linked and ready. She had cleaned and lubricated the M2 twice, checked the headspace and timing, and ensured she had spare barrels within reach. The standard combat load was 300 rounds. Nicole always carried 4 times that. Rodriguez had once asked her why. She said she had nightmares about running out of ammunition while soldiers died. The convoy departed Camp Victory at 14:20 hours, moving at 45 miles per hour, maintaining 50-meter intervals between vehicles. Nicole stood in the turret, scanning her sector through the armored glass shields. The M2 was charged, a round in the chamber, her thumbs resting on the butterfly trigger. She wore flame-resistant gloves, body armor with safety plates, and had wrapped a wet towel around her neck, an old gunner's trick to prevent brass burns. They passed the first 3 checkpoints without incident. Iraqi police waved them through. Civilian traffic pulled aside. Everything seemed routine, but Nicole noticed the changes that training and experience had taught her to recognize. No children asking for candy. No street vendors. Windows shuttered in the middle of the day. The hair on her neck stood up under the wet towel. She keyed her intercom to Rodriguez. "It's too quiet, Sergeant." At 14:37 hours, they entered the industrial district, a maze of warehouses and factories that provided perfect concealment for ambush. The convoy was moving through a natural choke point. Concrete barriers on both sides funneled them into a kill zone 400 meters long. Nicole was scanning the rooftops when she saw the initiation, a flash of RPG launch from a building 200 meters to the right. Training took over. Nicole swung the M2 toward the launch site and pressed the butterfly trigger. The weapon roared to life, sending 50 caliber rounds downrange at 2. The RPG gunner disappeared in a pink mist, but Nicole was already tracking to the next threat, muzzle flashes from the warehouse windows. She held the trigger down, walking burst across the building face, punching basketball-sized holes through concrete blocks. The ambush exploded around them. IEDs detonated behind the lead vehicle, trying to trap the convoy. RPGs streaked from multiple buildings. AK-47 fire erupted from prepared positions. The convoy was taking fire from three sides, a complex, coordinated ambush involving at least 40 insurgents. Radio traffic exploded with contact reports, calls for fire, vehicles reporting damage. Nicole understood the situation instantly. If she stopped firing, if she took time to reload or change barrels, the RPG teams would destroy the convoy. The only thing keeping them alive was suppressive fire. She had to become a wall of lead between the insurgents and her fellow soldiers. She pressed the butterfly trigger and didn't let go. The M2 Browning is a remarkable weapon, designed by John Browning in 1918 and still in service over a century later. But it has limitations. The barrel can only handle sustained fire for so long before heat working affects accuracy and risks catastrophic failure. The standard procedure is to fire 6 to 9 round bursts with 4 to 5 seconds between bursts. After 150 rounds, you change the barrel. Nicole was about to ignore every one of these rules. She held the trigger down and traversed the weapon in a continuous arc, maintaining a stream of fire that swept across the kill zone like a scythe. The first 200 rounds suppressed the RPG teams. The next 200 destroyed the machine gun positions, but more insurgents kept appearing, and Nicole kept firing. The barrel began to glow, first red, then orange. Steam rose from the weapon as residual oil burned off. The ammunition can emptied, but Nicole had positioned the cans for seamless transition. She shifted to the second can, without missing a beat. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez was calling out targets, but Nicole was already engaging them. Her vision had tunneled to the relationship between the weapon and the threat. She could feel the M2's rhythm changing as it heated up, could sense when to adjust her aim as the barrel warped. She was pushing the weapon into territory no manual covered, where mechanical failure was certain. But she kept firing. At the 400-round mark, the barrel was glowing cherry red. The heat was so intense, it burned through her flame-resistant gloves. The skin on her hands began to blister, but she maintained her grip on the butterfly trigger. Brass casings piled around her feet, so hot they melted portions of her boots. The heat shimmer from the barrel distorted her sight picture, but she compensated instinctively. The convoy was trying to move through the kill zone, but 2 vehicles had been disabled by IEDs. The fuel tankers, the most vulnerable vehicles, were trapped in the center of the ambush. If even one RPG hit a tanker, the entire convoy would be consumed in flames. Nicole understood this. Every insurgent who raised a weapon toward the tankers died before they could fire. She had become a human point defense system. At 600 rounds, the weapon's cyclic rate began to change. The heat had expanded metal components, affecting the timing. Any other gunner would have stopped, knowing the weapon was about to fail. Nicole adjusted her trigger control to match the weapon's new rhythm and kept firing. The barrel was now glowing white-hot, the heat so intense that Rodriguez had to shield his face when looking up at the turret. First Lieutenant Mitchell was screaming over the radio for all vehicles to push through the kill zone. The disabled vehicles would have to be abandoned, but pushing through meant 90 seconds of exposure to enemy fire. Nicole would have to maintain suppressive fire for the entire time. She was already at 700 rounds continuous. The weapons manual said the gun should have failed 500 rounds ago. The feed tray cover, made of steel, began to warp from the heat. The weapon was literally melting under Nicole's hands. Her gloves had completely burned through. Her hands were now in direct contact with superheated metal, but she didn't let go. She later said she couldn't feel the pain, that her entire existence had narrowed to the butterfly trigger and the need to keep firing. At 800 rounds, something extraordinary happened. The barrel, warped beyond specification, should have caused rounds to tumble wildly. Instead, the dispersion pattern created an almost perfect cone of fire that covered the entire threat sector. Nicole was no longer aiming at individual targets. She had turned the M2 into an area denial weapon. No insurgent could expose themselves anywhere in the kill zone without entering her field of fire. The convoy was moving now, vehicles accelerating through the ambush, but insurgents were attempting to mass for a final assault on the fuel tankers. Nicole saw them gathering in an alley, at least 15 fighters preparing to rush the convoy with RPGs and satchel charges. She traversed the M2 and held the trigger down, sending a stream of .50 caliber rounds into the alley. The hypervelocity rounds punched through walls, vehicles, anything in their path. When the dust cleared, the alley was empty except for blood and scattered weapons. At 1,000 rounds, the M2 was no longer a machine gun. It had become something else, something that shouldn't exist. The barrel was warped into a slight S-curve, glowing like a lightsaber from Star Wars. The receiver was too hot to touch anywhere. Smoke poured from the weapon as lubricants burned off. The heat had fused parts of the feed mechanism. By all rights, it should have exploded, sending shrapnel through Nicole and anyone nearby. But Nicole had developed an almost mystical connection with the weapon. She could feel its limits, knew exactly how much more it could give. She modulated her trigger pressure, allowing microsecond breaks that kept the weapon just below catastrophic failure. She was playing the M2 like a musical instrument, conducting a symphony of suppressive fire that held death at bay for 92 American soldiers. The last vehicle cleared the kill zone at 14:43 hours. 6 minutes and 17 seconds had elapsed since the ambush began. Nicole had fired 1,100 rounds in sustained bursts that weren't really bursts at all, just one long, continuous act of will that transformed a machine gun into a shield. As the convoy reached safety, Nicole finally released the butterfly trigger. The silence was deafening. The M2 was destroyed. The barrel had warped beyond use. The feed tray had partially melted. The receiver was cracked from heat stress. Nicole's hands were burned so badly that skin came off when Rodriguez helped her remove what was left of her gloves. She had second and third-degree burns on her hands, arms, and face from the radiant heat. Her body armor had protected her torso, but the exposed areas looked like she had been in a fire. The medic, Specialist Thompson, treated Nicole's burns as the convoy continued to Camp Victory. She remained conscious, asking about casualties, refusing morphine until she confirmed everyone was alive. When Thompson told her there were 0 KIA, 0 critical injuries, Nicole finally allowed herself to cry, not from pain but from relief. The after-action review revealed the full scope of what Nicole had accomplished. Aerial reconnaissance counted 31 enemy KIA in the kill zone, all from .50 caliber rounds. The insurgent force, estimated at 40 to 50 fighters, had been completely suppressed by one gunner. The attack, which intelligence later determined had been planned for 3 months, was defeated in 6 minutes by a single M2 and the soldier who refused to stop firing. The weapons inspection was even more remarkable. The armorer, Master Sergeant Kevin Hayes, had never seen an M2 pushed to such extremes. The barrel had warped 17 degrees from true. The chamber had expanded from heat. The feed tray had melted and re-solidified. By all physics, the weapon should have exploded around 500 rounds. Hayes sent the destroyed M2 to Aberdeen Proving Ground for analysis. The engineers there couldn't explain how it had continued to function. Nicole spent 3 weeks at the Combat Support Hospital in Baghdad, undergoing treatment for her burns. She required multiple skin grafts on her hands. The nerve damage was significant, but not permanent. The physical therapy was excruciating, but she was determined to return to duty. She said she had 91 other soldiers counting on her. The intelligence value of the failed ambush was significant. Documents recovered from dead insurgents revealed a coordinated plan involving 3 cells, over 100 pounds of explosives, and intelligence on convoy routes that suggested inside information. The attack was meant to be a propaganda victory, destroying an entire American convoy on the airport road. Instead, it became a legend about American firepower and the gunner who wouldn't stop shooting. The story spread through the military like wildfire. Gunners across Iraq started carrying extra ammunition, trying to match Nicole's loadout. The incident became a case study at the Army's machine gun courses, though instructors were careful to note that what Nicole did should never be attempted. The weapon should have killed her. The M2 she destroyed was displayed at Fort Benning with a placard that read, SPC Anderson's gun, 1,100 rounds, 6 minutes, 0 friendly casualties. Nicole received the Silver Star for her actions en route Irish. The citation read in part, Specialist Anderson's extraordinary heroism and complete disregard for her own safety saved the lives of 92 coalition soldiers. Her actions in maintaining sustained suppressive fire under impossible conditions represent the highest traditions of military service. But Nicole struggled with the attention. She insisted she had just done her job, that any gunner would have done the same. When asked how she had maintained fire despite the pain and the certainty of weapon failure, she said simply, I could see my guys dying if I stopped. The pain in my hands was nothing compared to what would happen if I let go of that trigger. She returned to duty after 2 months of recovery, though her hands would never be quite the same. The nerve damage left her with reduced sensation in her fingers, and cold weather caused severe pain. But she could still shoot, still operate the M2, still protect her convoy. She completed her deployment and volunteered for another tour, saying she had unfinished business in Iraq. The insurgents who survived the ambush en route Irish spread their own version of the story. They called Nicole the Devil's Daughter, claiming she had supernatural powers, that her weapon had been blessed by evil spirits. They avoided attacking any convoy that had female gunners, believing them to be protected by the same dark magic. The psychological impact of one specialist with an M2 lasted longer than any tactical victory. In 2009, Nicole was invited to the Special Operations Forces Industry Conference to speak about the engagement. She stood before an audience of special operations soldiers, defense contractors, and weapons designers and explained how she had destroyed an M2 to save her convoy. When asked what modifications could be made to improve the weapon, she said, Don't change anything. The Modus is perfect. It did everything I asked it to do and more. It gave its life for my convoy. You can't improve on that. The M2 Browning has been in service since 1933, used in every American conflict since World War II. Thousands of gunners have employed it in combat, pushed it to its limits, relied on it when everything else failed. But only one gunner ever pushed it beyond destruction, held it together through pure will, and turned 6 minutes of mechanical impossibility into survival for 92 soldiers. Today, Nicole Anderson works as an instructor at the Army's machine gun course at Fort Benning. Her hands still bear the scars from Route Irish, a permanent reminder of 6 minutes when she became one with her weapon. She teaches new gunners the technical aspects of the M2, but more importantly, she teaches them the warrior spirit, the willingness to push beyond limits when lives depend on it. Every class asks her the same question. How did you keep firing when the weapon was destroying itself and cooking your hands? Her answer never changes. The M2 and I had an understanding. It would keep firing as long as I kept squeezing. Neither of us was allowed to quit while our soldiers were in danger. The weapon kept its promise, and I kept mine. The convoy from May 23, 2007, still holds reunions every year. All 92 soldiers who survived Route Irish, because of Nicole's 1,100 rounds, they call themselves Nicole's 92. Many have named daughters Nicole. Several became gunners, inspired by her example. All of them carry the memory of 6 minutes, when one specialist with a machine gun stood between them and death and refused to let go.